So, who was the richest person to ever live? It's a fantastic question, right? It sends you down this crazy rabbit hole of kings, conquerors, and modern-day tech titans. But you know what? The answer is way more complicated than you might think. Okay, let's dive in and figure this out. All right, to even begin to get our heads around the kind of money we're talking about today, let's just start with a benchmark. If you earn an average salary, you'd have to work for, wait for it, 8 million years to get to Elon Musk's peak net worth. I mean, that is 30 times longer than our species, Homo sapiens, has even been on this planet. It's just wild.
But here's the thing. As absolutely mind-boggling as that number is, history is just packed with people whose wealth, depending on how you measure it, could make today's billionaires look, well, kind of poor. So let's go on a hunt for the richest person who ever walked the earth.
To do this right, we have to start by understanding the world we live in now, the scale of the modern global economy. It's just something brand new in human history.
And that brings us to our modern champion, Elon Musk, with a peak net worth floating around $400 billion. He is, without a doubt, the biggest fish in today's enormous global pond. But the real question is he the biggest fish of all time?
So, let's meet our historical contenders. Because for most of human history, incredible wealth wasn't about stocks or crypto. It was about stuff you could actually touch or control.
And this immediately shows us our biggest problem. What even is wealth? Is it having mountains of physical cash like Pablo Escobar? The guy was spending $1,000 a week just on rubber bands to hold his stacks of money. Or is it about absolute power, like Joseph Stalin? He had basically no personal money, but he controlled every single part of a $10 trillion state economy.
Okay, next up, a man who basically defined an entire era of American capitalism, the king of the Gilded Age, the world's very first billionaire, Mr. John D. Rockefeller.
Rockefeller's story is just a masterclass in capitalism. He founded Standard Oil, and he was so good at it that by the 1880s, he controlled 90% of all the oil in America. The government literally had to step in. The Supreme Court declared his company a monopoly and broke it apart. And then, in the craziest twist, the breakup made him even richer. The stocks of all the little baby companies just went to the moon.
But now, let's rewind the clock, way back to the 14th century. We're going to the Mali Empire to meet a king whose wealth was built on probably the most timeless asset of them all, pure gold.
Mansa Musa's wealth was so huge, it's almost impossible to actually put a number on it. Get this, on his pilgrimage to Mecca, he traveled with a 60,000-person entourage, and he just gave away so much gold that he completely crashed the economies of the places he passed through for years. I mean, that's a flex.
And the list of these historical heavyweights just keeps going. You've got King Solomon back in the 900s BCE with an estimated wealth of over $2 trillion. Then you have Augustus Caesar, who literally owned all of Egypt, putting his net worth around $5 trillion. Jump to the 1200s, and Genghis Khan didn't just have money, he controlled the biggest land empire in history. And then by the 1500s, you had bankers like Jacob Fugger, an individual who owned 2% of Europe's entire GDP.
Okay, so after looking at all these unbelievable fortunes built on gold and land and pure power, we have to pause for a second and ask a much more basic question about what it is we're actually comparing here.
And this is where it all gets really tricky. I mean, seriously, can you compare the value of Genghis Khan's empire to Rockefeller's oil monopoly? Or Mansa Musa's gold to Elon Musk's Tesla stock? This is where just comparing the numbers starts to completely fall apart.
Now, one really interesting way to try and compare them is to look at their wealth as a percentage of their country's economy. So back in 1913, John D. Rockefeller's fortune was worth 2% of the entire US GDP. Today, Elon Musk is worth about 1.4%, so by that logic, Rockefeller had a bigger slice of the American pie.
But, and this is probably the most important part of this whole thing, the pie itself is astronomically bigger now. The US economy today is 22 times larger than it was back in 1913. The entire game has changed. And that is the absolute key to understanding all of this. Yes, Rockefeller had a bigger percentage, but it was a percentage of a much smaller total. The whole world has just become so much more prosperous over time, which means the pond that today's richest people swim in is just bigger than it has ever been. So, armed with this new perspective, that it's not just about your slice, but the total size of the pie, we can finally reach a verdict in our hunt for the richest person in history.
And the answer, believe it or not, despite all those incredible historical giants, is Elon Musk.
Now, I know that might sound a little controversial, but the reason why goes way beyond just one inflation-adjusted number.
Here's the case for Musk. First, he's the biggest fish in the biggest pond in all of human history. Second, his fortune is a personal, verifiable one. It's not tied to being a king or a dictator who just controls the state's assets. And finally, the guy commands technology that ancient rulers would have literally thought was magic.
And here's a really interesting takeaway from all this. What history seems to show is that as the overall economic pie has grown over the centuries, the potential for prosperity has just exploded. The scale of wealth and opportunity in the modern world is just something that was unimaginable in past eras. Which leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to think about. If this trend keeps going, and that pie just keeps getting bigger and bigger, it's really not a matter of if we'll see the world's first trillionaire, but when. And what on earth will that world look like?